Alright, in this video, I want to talk more about the American Revolution. Now, what you see here is the Boston Tea Party, which is supposed to have actually triggered the war, the start of the war. And I thought something was strange about this years ago. After thinking about it, I was like, okay, so we're the land of the free, home of the brave, and we're ready to go to war with England, who owned the 13 colonies at the time, but we're going to dress as Native Americans to do it. That doesn't sound like we're actually going to instigate a war with England. That actually looks like we are a bit cowardly there. And we are trying to make it look like natives did it so that England would probably end up attacking the natives. Does it not? Because why else would you dress up as the Native Americans? Unless you were trying to blame them for the event. Right? But anyway, this war was not about our freedom. You see, the colonies were relatively free, more free than we are today. They were under the English common law, which is the Christian law, basically stating that everybody is free. We're all basically brothers and sisters with no one's ruling over anybody. There's nobody above anybody else, right? That's how common law is, right? And we're not really under that law anymore. We can be if we choose to be, but we've all agreed to be under civil law, which is Roman law or Roman admiralty law, the law of the sea, opposed to common law, which is the law of the land. And that's why today you have all these stupid regulations, right? You need to have a social security number to get a job, and you need all kinds of different licenses to do all these things, even though you're free, right? And not only that, you got all kinds of different laws and crimes that there's no victim, right? Such as you going through a red light, a stop sign, or parking in a certain place when there's nobody around, nobody got hurt, but the state is the victim. You have to pay the state, but the state is not a real person, not a living. There's no harm done to it because it doesn't exist, right? And under common law, the government, the state, is under man because man created it. Just like man would be under God because God created us, right? But obviously, we're not under that law anymore. And that's because of the American Revolution. Not just this war, but later on with the American Civil War, did we lose even more freedoms? Where they're talking about the Civil War, which I'll only briefly mention something right now, maybe more later in a different video, was supposed to be about slavery and setting slaves free, but after the Civil War, they made everybody citizens and under Roman law, and everybody became slaves to the government, the state. Because as the citizen, you're owned by the government. That's why the government can't do anything if you're not a citizen, because it has no jurisdiction over you. So people are confused about how all these people, like the illegal immigrants and people who are not citizens, how there's very little the government does or can do. And that is because they have no jurisdiction over them. But as a citizen, it has jurisdiction, so it can tell you what's what and to jump and how high and all that stuff, right? But that's all because you agreed to it. You haven't really realized you've done it. Because you have a social security number, you've made yourself a straw man, a legal person, a avatar, if you will, to play the game, kind of like you're making a character to play some kind of board game or video game of some kind, right? You make yourself a little avatar character to be able to play the game. And that's basically how you're able to work with the government, but by doing so, the government makes all the rules and is in charge. And you submitted to it. Those of us alive today, it's because we grew up in it. We didn't know any better. We just figured, hey, this is how things are. But back in the day, the people fought against this, but they were manipulated into accepting it. And this is probably going to be a pretty long video. You probably know that because you can see the timestamp, but I don't see that quite yet. I'm just guessing this is going to be pretty long. Because at the end, there's a very interesting article I want to read. And you can just go to the description box and check it out for yourself if you want to read it. Or you can continue, because eventually after I'm done making some points here, I'm going to end up reading that article. It's, I guess, moderately long. So if you want to listen to me go through it and probably say some things about it as I go through it, stay tuned. If not, you can just jump right to that article. Do what you want to do. It should be the top link in the description. If it's not there, leave a comment saying, hey, what's up with that? Because I probably forgot. But anyway, a couple of points I wanted to make before I really get into this. I guess the first thing is about the common law. Now here is civil law, or Roman admiralty law. And I just wanted to read this part here, just a quick little article here in a PDF form. This is not the article I was talking about. This is just a quick little thing I wanted to read here, just to give an example, where it says here, under the Roman law, a person in a broad sense may be defined as a being capable of becoming the subject of legal rights and duties. This definition recognizes not only a natural person, but an artificial one, brought into existence with the consent of state authority. Now that's basically saying that the state is an entity itself, a person, able to create other persons, just like men and women can create other men and women, right? As it goes on to say, the extent of one's legal capacity depended upon his civil status. He could be a free man or a slave, a citizen or a foreigner, independent of paternal authority or dependent upon it. So you see here how a connection between free, slave, citizen, foreigner, you notice that they're different, right? If you're a citizen, you're not a free man. That's a separate category. There's free men, there's slaves, there's citizens, and there's foreigners. And a person isn't necessarily a natural man or woman like you and I. A person, it can be the entity that you created with your social security number and your name in all capital letters, showing you that that's not in English, that's in a form of Pig Latin, that is a corporation. And you are acting as, in some sense, a trustee to it or a manager of it. But unknown to yourself, you've actually identified yourself with it, such as when you talk to the police and they take your driver's license or your ID and they say, hey, is this you? And you say yes, you're agreeing to be that corporate entity. Or in a sense, you're claiming to be also that card in their hand. And there's other things like this that a cop may ask you, such as, do you understand? Do you understand me? And if you say yes, because you think they're saying, do you comprehend? You agree to stand under them. And that's why police, you may have seen videos and heard stories of it, or may have happened to you, where the police are able to get away with seemingly breaking the law by mistreating you, harming you, physically beating you, raping, killing, and they seem to get away with it. But when they look at the footage, these cops are free from any punishment because the people that they committed the crimes to agreed to it. They just didn't realize they did. So if you're ever wondering how the cops get away with it, it's not necessarily that the government is corrupt, even though it is. It actually has to do with people not knowing the law and not realizing they're agreeing to be under the police officer and that they're not a living entity. They can be treated however that officer feels like treating them that day. So if he's having a bad day, you kind of just irk him, and then he gets you to agree, all of a sudden he takes his frustrations out on you. That's just too bad, huh? So sad. Because under their mindset, it is ignorance of the law is no excuse. So you don't know the law, they don't care. That's your problem, not theirs. Right? So, with that being said, I just wanted to move looking at a real quick highlighted part from this PDF as well. This is not the article that I'm going to be reading all the way through. I just wanted to make a reference here to show you that common law is English Christian law and how Roman law is civil law. So you can see that this is actually a war between Catholicism and Protestantism. It says here in this start of this article, it says, most nations today follow one of two major legal traditions, common law or civil law. The common law tradition emerged in England during the Middle Ages and was applied within British colonies across continents. The civil law tradition developed in continental Europe at the same time was applied in the colonies of Europe. Imperial powers such as Spain and Portugal. Civil law was also adopted in the 19th and 20th centuries by countries formerly possessing distinctive legal traditions such as Russia and Japan that sought to reform their legal systems in order to gain economic and political power comparable to that of Western European nation states. So we see here that's basically the two main laws. One's a Christian law, and one, I would just say, is a satanic law. These are the two laws that basically each nation chooses from. In America, both laws are applied. You get to choose which one you're under. But most unknowingly are under the Roman civil law. And they might not want to be there if they actually knew the truth about everything. So hopefully this is a stepping stone for you to look into that stuff. I think more pastors should be talking about such things. But most pastors are part of churches that are 501c3 organizations, which means they're tax exempt and are basically government agencies. And they have to abide by certain rules. And this is probably one of those things that's a no-no for them to talk about. That's why you're not hearing these kind of things. Because this is the kind of thing that ties into what Jesus said about the truth will set you free. And that's exactly what it does. Because then you realize that the government has no jurisdiction over you. That it's able to do these things because you submit to it. And that's why a lot of these people can get away with doing illegal activities, because illegal does not mean unlawful, right? They're not the same thing. Because under common law, there's lawful and unlawful things. But in civil law, there's illegal and legal things. Now, civil law doesn't even have to apply to you. But common law is always going to apply to you. So that's something you need to learn about and look into so that you can understand for yourself to protect you and your family. But anyway, we can see that looking at this, that the world is in this sort of revived Roman Empire that we read about in Daniel chapter 2 about the statue. The time starts with the golden head representing the kingdom of Babylon, which is conquered by the chest and arms of silver, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. And then you have the the belly and thighs of brass, which is the Alexandrian Grecian Empire that ends up conquering them. And then later on in time, you got the legs of iron as you come down. That is the Roman Empire. But at the end, right before the stone cut without hands, Jesus Christ returns and hits the statue at the feet to destroy the whole statue. That final statue, the final metal, is iron mixed with miry clay. And clay represents God's people. So Judeo-Christians, meaning Jews and Christians, God's people, true Jews and true Christians. So you see that that's exactly what's going on in the world. There's a mixture of this Roman law with common law. That's why the nation, as described in Daniel chapter 2, is partly strong and partly weak. Because it has part of the strength of the iron where it can impose things as a dictator. But then at the same time, if people know that they're under the common law, they have no power. So it's as if they're clay. They can be molded and changed, right? Because under common law, the people have the power. Not under Roman law or civil law, right? So I'm just going to come back to this picture for a second. I hope you're starting to see what this is all about here. When I get into that article, it's going to get into great detail. So it should become a lot more clear. Right now, you're probably like, okay, I can see a little bit, but I don't quite follow. I don't quite think you're right about this. All right, fair enough. Look more into it and stay tuned. Okay? One of these things I want to point out right now is how Roman Catholicism was butting heads with Protestant England, and they wanted to regain England. I'm going to get into more detail about that, but a lot of it is brought up in that article, so I hope you stay tuned and listen to that, or at least go read it for yourself. And in America, there wasn't a lot of Catholics. It was Protestant majority. So, of course, Catholics wouldn't want a democracy then because the vote would outrule them, right? But now that there's more and more Catholics flooding into the nation ever since the American Revolution and the Civil War, that's changed, right? Now, yeah, let's change to a democracy because now we can have Catholic rule because there's more Catholics, they can outvote the Protestants, right? And as you can see, as the nation got away from the English common law and Christianity, where they also attacked the King James Bible, right? Protestantism, and they kicked it out of the schools, and then they brought in all kinds of different translations. The nation of America has become more and more corrupted, more and more satanic, more and more in bondage, less and less free, and more following after bread and circuses to be distracted and not deal with reality so that there wouldn't be a revolt, right? And yeah, so America in this revolution was actually for the Roman Catholic Church to defeat two enemies. Actually, three enemies here. You see, they had the Protestant colonies that they needed to subjugate, but they also had to destroy the power of Protestant England, and they also had to take the land from the natives, Hence why they brought in people to dress like Native Americans, because this was a Jesuit scheme. The Catholics were never friendly to the indigenous, whether it was in Mexico or in Canada or in the Americas. They've always been wanting to get rid of them. You can look into the history. Like the Mexicans think it's their Mexican heritage to be Catholic and to speak Spanish. But that's because they were conquered by Catholic Spain and they were forced into converting. So their history is lost. Right? It's a new European history and culture they have now. In Canada, they would force the indigenous to convert, and if they wouldn't, they ended up killing them off. There's all kinds of atrocities done in Canada by the Catholic Church to the indigenous, and they remember these things. You can look into this stuff, a lot of horrible things. So of course they would want help from their enemies, to have their enemies fight against each other so they can destroy themselves and weaken themselves while they get more power. Something similar happened in World War II, where Allied bombing ended up bombing a lot of Protestant residential areas in Germany. Very convenient for the Catholic population there and the Roman Catholic Church to regain Germany after the Reformation. Interesting how that worked out for them. But that's another war. Going off to another subject. But yeah, so you can see how all of this was to benefit the Roman Catholic Church. It wasn't to benefit us. Because under the common law, we had a 2% tax from England. And they were giving us benefits. It's not as if it was for nothing. And now we have a 40% plus tax under Roman law. You see, as things become more and more Catholic and further away from Protestantism, things tend to go to shit. You can see this in all the different nations. England, America, being Protestant, predominantly Protestant, using the King James Bible, blessed by God, became strong, mighty nations and blessing the world with ministry work, missionary work. And then they start to become Catholic, and all of a sudden, the countries go to shit. Ain't that something? As it becomes more and more Catholic, it just degrades. And yes, that's a knock on Catholicism, because it's not of God. It's Satan's religion, upholding basically the Roman pontiff as Jesus, as God, even calling him infallible. Even if they say he's infallible only when he speaks ex cathedra, nobody is infallible, no man, if he's speaking in ex cathedra or not, from the chair or not. But there's a couple of pictures I wanted to look at, because to help with this, who conveniently helped us to fight off England so that England would fall apart, and then after the Revolutionary War, both England and America were in debt, starting off already in a bit of slavery, debt slaves. France. Catholic France came in and helped. Ain't that something? Because the Catholics already tried to use the Spanish Armada to attack England and to bring them into submission. But God intervened and just brought a storm that completely wiped out the Spanish Armada. So their forces were done. They couldn't do anything to England. But France still had something to them. So France helped America. And since it wasn't the Catholics attacking the Protestants, because the Catholics already realized God's with the Protestants, as they saw with the Spanish Armada going after England, God's going to protect his people. But now he has Protestant Americans fighting against Protestant English, brother against brother. So now the Catholics can feed up one side to help destroy the other, and vice versa. Because now both sides are God's people. So they realize that's how they can do it. Because they couldn't do it themselves. Because God's not with them. But they were smart enough to realize that. And came up with these tactics here. So afterwards, after the Revolutionary War, France gifts America something. Right here. They call it Lady Liberty. It's supposed to be, like it says here, icon. You know, it's not idol, icon of American freedom. You notice after the Revolutionary War, all of a sudden, the predominantly Protestant nation puts up an icon, an idol, showing that it's now Catholic, as this is very close to the representation of this statue here, Helios Christos, so-called sun god worshipped by Constantine, the emperor of Rome. Ain't that interesting? But there's more to this, because the eagle plays a big part here. See, the Romans used the eagle to represent their legions, the legions of their military, the army. So you can get a sense of the eagle representing something demonic. And an eagle would be, according to the Old Testament, a dirty bird. And a dirty bird represents satanic forces, something evil, like a demon, a devil, such as we read in the parable of the sower from Luke chapter 8. I think I actually have Luke up here. So let's come over here to Luke chapter 8, just real quick to show you. Jesus talks about the parable. He says the fowl of the air eat the seed, right? And then when he explains the parable, he says that what that represented was the seed was the word of God, and the devil comes and he takes the word out of their hearts lest they should believe. So you see that the fowls of the air are the birds. If you're not sure what fowls are, that just means birds. That they eat the seed. That's the devil taking the word out of the heart so that you don't believe, that you be saved. So you get that reference to the eagle not necessarily being something good, right? I mean, not that there's nothing good about it, but you can see that in this world there's a lot of gray, good and evil. And sometimes people will ignore the evil and just focus on the good. And sometimes vice versa, people will ignore the good and focus on all the evil. But ultimately, we got to realize that this whole world is full of that. It's Babylonian confusion. And ultimately, we need to focus on God. Just a little bit of a side point to make there is sometimes you can get caught up in these things, and you got to realize that people are not really aware of all these things. Some things everybody seems to be aware of, that everybody knows that a pentagram is satanic, right? But then when you show them other symbol, like, hey, this is satanic, they might not realize it, and they like to use it. An example would be the cross. The cross is a pagan symbol that Rome used, and it's a torture device, basically like an electric chair or a lethal injection chair, right? It's a device to kill. Yet Christians use that to represent Jesus and say that they're Christian. Not something I would do, but I know that people don't really think these things through, and they kind of just go with it because they never really questioned it, right? They think they're doing something for God, they're honoring God. But yeah, I don't think that's the the way to do it. But yeah, I'm going to take a break right here. And that's why I said I already know this is going to be a long video. I'm going to take a pause right here. You're not even going to notice. It's just going to splice through. And I'll continue on. I got to make a couple more points, and then I'm going to read that article. So stay tuned. All right, continuing with this here. I wanted to share this with you. The French architect that put together the Statue of Liberty made it after this painting of Lucifer. And the name of this painting is called Lucifer Summoning His Legions. You notice how there's also an eagle there, because it's a depiction of, again, Rome. And obviously, America has been a military force in the world. But we're basically doing crusades, right? Because we really have no business over in the Middle East. But we go over there anyway. Where 9/11 was obviously an inside job, those buildings came down in controlled demolition. And if you can't accept that, then you either are really, really stupid, or you're afraid to accept the truth because of what it means. And you can't handle reality, so you would rather just hold on to that lie. Those are the only two options. Because those buildings came down perfect in controlled demolition, not destroying the buildings next to them, didn't fall over and do anything like that. And it was twice. And actually a third building they ended up destroying in controlled demolition as well. But anyway, as soon as that happened, they already know who did it. It was the Muslims. In America, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But nope, we called them guilty, went over there to Afghanistan, to Iraq, and said they had weapons of mass destruction. Find out there's nothing. They do got poppy fields and oil, though. And Muslims that wanted to actually change the sale of oil from the US dollar to gold, so they had to do something about that. And then later on, you have, was it Libya and Syria, I think some other nations that wanted to move away from the US dollar as the standard to trade oil, and they wanted to use gold or even the euro. So we go over there and we take them out too. So we see that we are Lucifer's legions to do his crusades, where we're not out there doing the right thing, defending God and country and what have you. We're going there doing other things. And they got everybody gung-ho about being patriotic when you're throwing away your Christian values, right? Not only that, your American values. Innocent until proven guilty, right? Yet you call them guilty before there's any kind of trial going on. Turns out no weapons of mass destruction. Oh, is there a sorry, some kind of reparation? Nope. Oh, too bad. So sad, right? It's basically how it is. Just how it goes, right? And as a Christian, it should be to love your enemies, bless those that curse you, right? And to join the military and believe, oh, I'm fighting for our freedoms, when there is no threat to our freedom from the Middle East, is delusional. It's as if people just like the glory. Oh yeah, I'm going to do a good godly thing and go fight these people from another land and kill them. you're fooling yourself if you think you're doing something godly. This patriotism is being twisted and manipulated to get you to do things you normally wouldn't do, right? Saying you're fighting for freedom when you fight against England, and then you end up being enslaved. Because right after the Revolutionary War, the uh, people in the South didn't want to pay their taxes, so George Washington went down there in the Whiskey Rebellion, and collected those taxes. So it's like, oh no, you see the Revolutionary War, you see what we did? We just kind of weakened England and America, put you in debt, got you to kill each other, and now you're going to have to pay taxes to us. We're the new leaders here. So you see how it's all been just a big dupe. And then they just fed everybody with propaganda about being uh, the home of the brave and the land of the free and all this stuff. And people chant that, but they obviously lack both, where they're cowards and they're slaves. And they're afraid to be free. But they like to sing the song about how they are brave and free when they're obviously not. And I don't expect a video like this to make many friends, but hopefully you'll realize that I'm probably one of the better friends you'll ever have, because I'm going to tell you the truth whether you like it or not. Whether it hurts your feelings or gets you upset, I'm not going to lie to you and blow smoke up your ass there. So you're welcome. But anyway, there's another picture I wanted to show before I end up reading the article. And that's this one right here. I'll make it a little bigger. These three cities are city-states that are not part of their nations. Vatican City is not part of Italy. London is not part of England. And Washington, D.C. is not part of America. Yes, they're cities in those lands, but they're not part of those nations, those countries, those states. And as you can see, Vatican City, this is the ultimate head, the religion, where you have the Roman pontiff is both king and high priest of this kingdom. He accepted the offer Satan gave to Jesus about having all the kingdoms of the world given to them if he would just bow to Satan. Jesus said no, but the Roman pontiff, the Roman pope, said yes. So that's why he sits there in that seat. And London here is the financial center. And Washington, D.C. is the military. Over here is where you got your Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve is not a government-owned bank. It's privately owned. So it's people over here getting rich off of your taxes. But again, this is not part of England. It's part of Vatican. So they do this through Roman law, civil law, and you agreeing to it without realizing you're agreeing to it, because they're the ones educating you. And then Washington, D.C., obviously military of this whole system. And you see homage to the Vatican, the same kind of building here as they have here in the little obelisk, the same kind of setup they have over here. And obviously the military. I don't think anybody's going to argue how that's how America is, military force of this kingdom. So when we're looking at Daniel's prophecy, we can see the feet of iron and clay already coming together. And with Israel back as a nation, we can see again Israel also mixed in with this kingdom. And eventually the New World Order will be headed in Jerusalem, where Israel's the head of the nations, the woman that's riding this beast here. But that's a bit in the future. But there's also something else to point out about Washington, D.C., is the District of Columbia. That name comes from Columbus, who is supposed to be a Catholic explorer from Spain who discovered the Americas. Even though the Americas were already discovered by the natives there, the Catholic Church likes to claim this is their right to the land of America because of Columbus discovering it. But that's not what happened, right? And so they have this District of Columbia that's not part of the actual United States, and it's put in a very interesting place between Maryland and Virginia, the Virgin Mary. Virginia and Maryland, giving you this stamp of Catholicism, that they're the ones running things, right? And ever since the American Revolution, there's been more influx of Catholics into America, and it's becoming more and more predominantly Catholic, where the country originally was very anti-Catholic. But today, people don't even think anything about it. They even think Catholicism is Christian, right? And they just keep bringing more and more in. And the more they bring in, the shittier the country becomes. Not because of the immigration, but because they're Catholic. You can say this is Catholic hating, Catholic bashing. It's the truth. It's the facts. It's how it is. I calls it how I sees it. And if the truth is bashing and hating on Catholics, well, that's the truth. Deal with it. But anyway, I hope you can see this. So what I'm going to actually do now is cut off for a minute here because I'm going to rest my voice, have some water, chill out, because I'm going to end up reading that article. And that might take me a minute. So I want to be fresh, and I want to make some commentary on it as I go through it. And I hope you stay tuned for it. It's very insightful stuff. You'll realize how all roads lead to Rome. That saying is a truth, because this is Satan's world. He rules over it. The Bible tells us that he is the God of this world. Where do you think he rules from? You figured it out yet? Because the Bible tells us through that statue of Daniel. He was in Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and at the end was Rome mixed with clay. And of course the clay is miry and it's baked, showing that it's dirty. That's why it's miry. And it's baked as in it's hardened, so that it's stubborn and won't mold. And that's basically how the Protestants and Jews have become, right? Denying Jesus as their king and basically saying we have no king but Caesar, or the Roman pontiff, Rome, and have mingled. And we can see that today. So I'll jump off now. It'll just seem like a couple seconds to you, I suppose. But I'll get back to this before you know it. So stay tuned. All right, let's actually get to this article here, which I found to be very interesting. And I hope you do too. I will put this link in the description if you just want to read it for yourself right now, because I'm basically just going to read it. I'm going to read it, but I'm probably also going to talk about things as things kind of stand out. So, this article is called The Jesuit-Led Vatican and the Anglo-American Israeli Empire. I thought it was an interesting title. But anyway, let's look into this. You know what? Give me 1 second to grab water because I didn't do so, just in case I need it. All right, now we're good to go. Thank you for your patience here. All right. It says here, it's difficult to trace the movement of British Israelism directly to the Vatican. However, some clarity can be attained by looking at the organizations involved with the movement. The Jesuit-led Vatican is the common denominator of power in Britain, Israel, and the United States. The Vatican is the head of the New World Order monster, and she has big plans for earthly Jerusalem. To understand how all of the intrigue has come to a head in our time, we must take a closer look at the historical record. In order to understand that the Vatican has the upper hand on both Britain and America, we need to examine the American Revolution. The United States is Rome's satellite and has been since the end of the Revolution. The historical record shows that the Jesuits fomented the American Revolution using Freemasonry as a cover. Prior to the American Revolution, 10 out of 13 colonies had put in place strict penal measures against Roman Catholicism and Catholics. Rome couldn't stand for that, so she brought about the revolution to correct the situation. The Constitution opened the door in the United States for the flourishing of Roman Catholicism and other cults. All of this was part of the Jesuit-led continuing counter-reformation that began in the 1940s. The U.S. Constitution, with its freedom of religion, gave us a Jesuitical, Freemasonic, universalistic government that put Rome in the driver's seat of the New World Order. The New World Order was launched right here on American soil in 1776. Rome and Britain had been locked in a battle for world dominance, and Rome was working desperately to get Britain back under her control since Britain broke off during the Reformation. The Spanish Armada was a failure, so Rome had to resort to covert means. Exactly what I was already talking about. Catholic monarch King James II, during his reign in England, put forth the Jesuit-constructed Declaration of Indulgences in 1787 in order to lift the restriction against Catholicism in England. It was written to include tolerance for all religions, but was really a mass to give tolerance to Rome. In 1688, English Protestants refused the declaration and deposed Catholic King James II from the throne. I'm going to just keep putting the paragraph I'm reading at the top because I know there's a watermark somewhere here in the middle so that you can read. I'm just going to keep moving it up. The liberty James wanted them to proclaim was neither more or less than indulgence to the Jesuits and the whole Church of Rome. Men knew the hand from which it came and saw the latent intention. Under the... Sorry that I'm not able to pronounce every word perfectly here, but it's just this... Okay, you're just going to have to read that word. Hopefully you're following along. Plea of toleration and liberty. The object of the declaration was to advance popery and give license to the Church of Rome and all its schemes for conquering England. Fast forward 100 years, and the Declaration of Indulgences was rewritten as the Declaration of Independence and solidified in the U.S. Constitution under the guise of freedom of religion. The American Revolution was not about tea or taxes, it was a religious war. With the American Revolution, Rome killed two birds with one stone, and I would say a third one as well, being the Native Americans. Rome separated the American colonies from Britain and delivered the colonies and all their wealth into Rome's hand. As part of the continuing Jesuit-led Counter-Reformation, Rome created the Constitution with freedom of religion built into it in order to allow Roman Catholicism to come in and swallow up biblical Christianity that had existed in the colonies. Remember, Catholicism had been banned in 10 out of 13 colonies. The American Revolution and Constitution made legal Catholicism what had been made illegal Catholicism in England. Tupper Saucy wrote in his book Rulers of Evil, before the Constitution was ratified, American Catholics had few civil rights. After ratification, they had them all. The Constitution welcomed agents of Pontifex Maximus, the world's chief enemy of Protestantism, into the ranks of government. Of the 2.5 million enumerated inhabitants in 1787 America, Roman Catholics population consisted of no more than 16,000 in Maryland, 7,000 in Pennsylvania, 1,500 in New York, and 200 in Virginia. Once the Constitution was in place, a steady influx of European immigrants transformed Roman Catholicism from America's smallest to largest religious denomination by 1850, around the time of the Civil War there. And another reason why they had the Civil War, again, a religious war against Protestants. The higher powers at Rome could view the United States as a viable tributary, if not another papal state. The whole American Revolution was a Jesuit scam. Most people wanted to stay loyal to Britain. Freemasons inside the British Parliament pushed laws, taxes on the American colonists to get them angry and rouse them to rebellion. That's exactly what Satan does, right? He gets you to rebel. If you're Christian, there's nothing to justify rebelling against the king, even with some taxes. But you can see how history repeats itself, because the same thing happened in Israel, where after Solomon, his son who replaced him, raised taxes. And since he raised the taxes, the northern 10 tribes of Israel rebelled. So we see a similar thing happen with Christianity here. But instead of Babylon, we're dealing with Rome. But it's the same entity, right? It goes on to say, Freemasons on the ground and the colonies fan the flames of revolution. Washington's Masonic Lodge at Fredericksburg, Virginia, was Catholic Jacobite infested. Jacobite Hugh Mercer came over to America from Scotland after having fought for the Catholic Jacobite cause in the army of Bonnie Prince Charlie. Hugh Mercer joined the Masonic Lodge in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and eventually became its master. Jacobite Hugh Mercer was also a close friend and advisor to George Washington. The Fredericksburg Masonic Lodge had 8 members who were generals in the American Revolution: Washington, Mercer, George Wheaton, William Woodford, Fielding Lewis, Thomas Posey, Gustavus Wallace, and the Marquis de Lafayette. The Fredericksburg Masonic Lodge got its charter from the Mother Kilwinning Lodge of Scotland in 1758. And there's something I should bring up that you might want to look into, and that is the Jesuit oath. This is on record in the United States Congress's library, because they actually had a court case against Jesuits, and they brought forth the Jesuit oath. This is something that's known. You can go look it up. And what's interesting is, in this oath, the Jesuits say that they will take on any role, that they would pretend to be anything in order to get the upper hand, right? So they would be spies, right? They would pretend to be Protestants. And not only that, it says that they would do everything to exterminate the Protestant race. And it's interesting that they call the Protestants a race. That's kind of interesting. I'm not sure what that has to do with. I don't know if it's something to have to do with Israel, where they're a race of people. I don't know if it has to do with us being born again, so we're part of the family of God. And I'm not sure if it has something to do with wheat and tares, Satan's seed and God's seed kind of thing. But it's pretty weird to have an oath talking about getting rid of a Protestant race when it's a religion, right? I mean, there's something weird about that. You can go look at it yourself. But anyway, it says here, prior to the American Revolution, the Jesuits infiltrated Freemasonry in the mid-1700s, which had evolved from the figurative Templars during the 14th-16th centuries. While hiding within the order of Freemasonry, the Jesuits were also operating on the ground out in the open. The British General Haldimand wrote to his superiors in the British government that the Jesuits were behind the American rebels. In the book Catholics and the American Revolution, Volume 3, 1906, written by Catholic Martin Ignatius Joseph Griffin, Griffin explains that during the American Revolutionary War, the British General Haldimand, while he was in Quebec, wrote a letter to the British Prime Minister, Lord North, which told Lord North that the French Jesuits were supporting the American rebels. Griffin writes, the French Jesuits were upholders of the American cause, hence the English authorities in Canada did not wish such Jesuits to enter the country. They desired priests from Savoy or other places. In 1783, General Haldimand wrote to Lord North that he had sent 2 French priests back to France, that the bishop desired recruits from the seminaries in France, that he was under Jesuit influence, that he is honorable, but that the Jesuits have sided with the rebels. Additionally, Griffin wrote 2 other volumes of his book, From Catholics and the American Revolution, Volume 1. Griffin quotes British General Haldimand directly from a letter that Haldimand wrote to Lord North. In this letter, Haldimand states plainly to Lord North that the Jesuits are supporting the American rebels in the Revolutionary War. Haldimand states, the Jesuits are the only order of regular priests who have shown an attachment to the rebels during the course of the war. The Jesuit Carroll family played a major role in the American Revolution. They were one of the wealthiest American families of the era. There were 3 Carroll sons, Daniel, John, and their first cousin Charles. All of them were trained in Jesuit warfare at the Jesuit St. Omer's College in France. John Carroll, I have another article about this John Carroll guy that I'll post under this link if you want to check that out. John Carroll became a teacher there. Daniel Carroll donated the land on which the U.S. Capitol building sits. Property records from the 1600s revealed that this land was called Rome. What? Charles Carroll was the war commissioner during the American Revolution. John Carroll was a close friend of Benjamin Franklin and even lived at Franklin's home. John Carroll founded the Jesuit powerhouse Georgetown University and would become the first Catholic bishop of the United States. In the decades following the American Revolution, the Americans built the U.S. Capitol building as an exact replica of St. Peter's Basilica. Yup. And even put a statue of the Queen of Heaven, Babylon, on top of it. Then they erected an obelisk facing the Capitol building, just like the one in the Vatican courtyard that faces St. Peter's Basilica. I wonder who won the Revolutionary War. A Vatican painter, Constantino Brumidi, not sure how that's pronounced, painted the interior of the U.S. Capitol dome with the apotheosis of George Washington, which mirrors paintings of the apotheosis of Ignatius Loyola found throughout Jesuit churches in Rome. Could it be any more obvious who founded this country? No, it can't. Right? It's all right there, and only those who don't want to accept the truth will deny it, and perhaps those that are just, bluntly to say, stupid, because some people just don't have the cognitive ability to put two and two together. I have trouble connecting the dots. But anyway, continuing, it says here, Rome hated the Constitution and Bill of Rights, but she permitted its creation knowing that she would eventually subvert and destroy it. And it didn't take long. Its creation was only necessary to allow Romanism to flourish where Romanism had been banned. Rome was thinking long-term, and her patience and diligence had paid off. As of the present day in the United States, Catholics outnumber Protestants. We have an intelligence community run by the Knights of Malta, which is subservient to the Jesuit order. 6 out of 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices are Roman Catholic. We have 28 Jesuit colleges and universities. Please understand that this writing is not an attack on Catholics. There are many good, everyday Catholic people in this country. But we must understand that Catholicism at the highest levels is Babylonian sun worship. It is the headquarters for occultism the world over. All of the other cults and ancient mystery schools flow from the feed into it. Rome has either launched or absorbed them all. And that's why they're called Catholics or Catholicism, because it's universal. Rome has always just absorbed every religion that it has conquered. It conquered a land. You can still worship your God, but you also have to worship the emperor. In this case would be the Pontifex Maximus or the Pope of Rome. But continuing on here, it says, during the 19th and 20th centuries, the Counter-Reformation continued, and the subversion of Protestantism by the Jesuits would intensify in Britain and the United States. In Britain and America, much of the subversion has its roots in the Oxford Tractarian movement and its Jesuitical futuristic prophetic schemes. These futuristic schemes would later be attached to Zionism and its variants, such as British Israelism, in order to influence the political sphere. Froome writes of how Jesuitical futurism began to overcome Protestantism in England during the 1800s. Catholic futurism, initially projected by Jesuit Ribera about 1585, began to obtain a foothold and then gain momentum among Protestants in Britain. Thus, the same concept that sought to break the force of the Reformation view of the papal Antichrist by assuming a future infidel Antichrist was again invoked to weaken the force of the great evangelical advent and prophetic awakening. Protestant expositors, some leading toward Rome and some prompted by rationalistic concept, joined hands in the attempt, perhaps unwittingly, to promote the Jesuit position. This, moreover, came to be tied inseparably with the Oxford Tractarian movement of the Anglican Church, wherein 90 tracts were scattered by the hundreds of thousands to favor Rome and to disprove the Protestant concept of Antichrist. Because Protestants from the start saw that the Pope of Rome was the seat of the Antichrist. Whoever was there is Antichrist, because there's more than one. Where you read in the scriptures of Antichrist being mentioned, you'll read it by John in his epistles, his short letters, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. That's the only place you're going to find Antichrist mentioned. And he says that there's many Antichrists. So to think that there's one, well, eventually there's going to be this beast fella that we refer to as Antichrist. And I refer to him as the Antichrist as well, because that's how people see him, because of everybody's mindset. So if I said the beast, you might not realize that I'm talking about the Antichrist, so I say Antichrist. But there is many Antichrists. The Pope is an Antichrist, because Antichrist means two things. It means not only to be against Christ, which the Pope is, He's against Jesus and the gospel and accepting what he's done to save you, but you saving yourself by submitting to him and his church. But he's also in place of Christ. That's what Antichrist is, in place of Christ. The Pope claims to be the vicar of Christ, calls himself the Holy Father. Pope means father. He's putting himself in the place of Christ. That's Antichrist. They even say that their priest become Christ in the confessional booth. That's many Antichrists, right? But anyway, it goes on to say here, let me take some water so I don't get all hoarse or anything. All right, here. It says, Jesuit futurism would influence Irving and Darby in England, and later Schofield in America. Far too many evangelicals today do not realize who was behind the work of Maitland Todd, Bohr, and the whole Oxford Tractarian movement. The reason that futurism made its way to Irving and Darby and later Schofield is because it flourished in the Anglican Church. And the reason futurism flourished in Anglicanism is for the simple reason that Jesuits were personally behind this work. The fact of the matter is clear. The whole Oxford movement, with its birth of modern-day dispensational futurism, was, from its concept, a movement going back to Rome. All right, so this person believes that dispensationalism goes back to Rome. That's interesting. This is something I see in scriptures. I'm willing to hear the guy out. If he shows how I'm wrong, okay. But we can obviously see there's a dispensation of being under the law and having to give up animal sacrifices and what have you. And now we're in a different dispensation where we're not under the law, we're under grace, and Jesus is our sacrifice once and for all. So right there you can see dispensations without getting into great detail. So to say that this is from Rome, I don't get that, but I'm willing to hear him out. Hopefully that's not what the rest of his article is about, because mainly what I want to talk about is the American Revolution. But if this helps understand that, awesome. So let's continue here. It says, after having injected into the body of Christ the concept of dispensational futurism, would later be leveraged to benefit political Zionism. And I know that's always been a dilemma that I've had, because you look at a lot of the things the nation of Israel does, namely rejecting Jesus, you're still supposed to support them. And it's kind of like, the way I see it is, well, you don't necessarily have to support them, just do not condemn them, don't attack them. That's all I can say is, when you look at Israel, look at it as a nation showing forth God's mercy and grace, where they don't deserve it, they haven't earned it, but they're God's people. He's going to deal with them. So you don't necessarily have to bless them because they're rejecting Jesus, but at the same time, don't curse them. All right? Just go be neutral, because I understand the moral dilemma. Just like there's some Christians that they would preach the gospel, and they seem like they're doing a great thing for God, but then they're caught up in some kind of sin. All right, well, you could speak out against the sin and encourage the good things, right? You don't necessarily have to just hold them up and ignore the sin, and you don't have to condemn them to hell, right? You can do something in the middle there. Condemn the sin, uphold what they're doing that is good, right? Because none of us are perfect, and we're all examples of God's mercy and grace. But anyway, let's continue on here. It says, the Jesuits were very successful at implementing dispensational futurism into the policies of Great Britain, and Britain indeed became the champion for Zionism. Yeah, they did do what they're saying next. The Balfour Declaration was a letter dated November 2nd, 1917 from the British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour to the Lord Rothschild. Walter Rothschild, second Baron Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community, for transmission to the Zionist Federation, a private Zionist organization. The letter stated the position agreed at a British cabinet meeting on October 31st, 1917, that the British government supported Zionist plans for a Jewish national home in Palestine, with the condition that nothing could be done which might prejudice the rights of existing communities there. The Jesuit Illuminati was very successful in conditioning, through the Jesuit Counter-Reformation, Great Britain to nurture the ideology of Zionism among European Jews. The second task of the Jesuits was to create events that would trigger the relocation of the Jews to Palestine. Part two of the Jesuit Illuminati's geopolitical strategy was to create fascism, inevitably to create the state of Israel and Palestine. This is from D.S. Ferris, The Two-Horned Beast, Part 2, The New World Order, Chapter 11. I got a couple things to say about that, because I was going to say that the Germans during World War II actually wanted to ship all the Jews to Palestine, and they were actually trying to help them create their state, even giving them some money to go over there. But eventually they were just going to kill them. But we see that that's exactly what we see in prophecies, such as I've been talking about Daniel chapter 2, that the end kingdom is iron and clay. Ultimately, the clay is Israel, and Israel is going to be the woman riding the beast. And as you can see, Rome is trying to reestablish Israel, right? And this fits into dispensationalism, because Israel said we have no king but Caesar, and eventually the Roman pontiff is going to want to be accepted as Messiah to the Jews, right? So he's going to help establish Israel so that he can appear to be the Messiah. Now, the one that's going to do it, I don't think, is Francis, because I think it's going to have to be somebody with some kind of Jewish blood, some kind of Jewish ties. But this person is either going to become Pope of Rome, the Roman Pontiff, or be connected somehow with the Roman Pontiff. And like we read in Revelation 6, a crown is given to this rider on a white horse, and a bow is given, so some kind of covenant, and he goes for conquering and to conquer. He's trying to look like Jesus, riding on a white horse, having a crown, going to conquer, and to conquer for who? Israel. He wants to establish them to say, hey, see, I'm the Messiah. Right? So with this guy talking about how they planned this all out, that's interesting that they planned it all out, because it actually fills prophecy, what we can actually see in the scriptures. But anyway, you got questions about that, you want to talk about that, leave a comment. I'm just going to give little tidbits so I can finish reading here. It goes on to say the roots of British Israelism are obscure, but it appears to be a movement created for political purposes as opposed to something that Christians genuinely and erroneously believe in. In the early days of the Zionist movement, there were some British politicians who embraced British Israelism and supported relocating the radical Jews to Palestine because they thought it would fulfill prophecy faster and hasten the second coming of Christ. Most telling is the British Israelism arose out of British Freemasonry. Therefore, we can assume British Israelism originated with the Jesuit, considering the Jesuit control Freemasonry in the country of Britain. Barry Chashimish, wrote in an article titled British Freemasonry Covets Israel. And makes sense. Without British Freemasonry, there would be no modern state of Israel. In the 1860s, the British Israelite movement was initiated from within Freemasonry. Anton Chaikin adds, the British monarchy and its prime minister and foreign office fabricated British Israelism in the 19th century from earlier versions of the story. They claimed that Queen Victoria was descended from the biblical King David, and was thus a descendant of the Davidic family tree that produced Jesus. They taught that the tribes of Israel wandered into northern Europe, that is, by the supposed genealogy. The British are the real chosen people, and the British Empire is thus God's empire. The modern Jews, by the British account, are not the historical Hebrews of Old Testament Israel, but rather the British are. But says the British Israel myth is a leap of logic. The Jews need to be put into Palestine to fulfill prophecy, get slaughtered in a war with Muslims, and bring about the end. To provide fuel for this mythology, the royal family asked the British Grand Lodge of Freemasonry to establish the Palestine Exploration Fund. I think that's weird. So they think what? England and its monarchy has to move to Israel? That's kind of weird. But anyway, let's continue here. What Anton Chaikin is describing as British Israelism is just another variation of Zionism, which ends up in the same place as regular Zionism. The radical Jews relocated to Palestine. However, Chatkin misses the fact that the Jesuits created the false futuristic prophetic schemes that support Zionism. It wasn't the British royals who concocted the Oxford Tractarian movement and its false future prophetic structures. Seemingly, British Israelism is just another angle from which the Jesuits can cause people to focus on the flesh and earthly Jerusalem. The Jesuits are the great Zionists. Likely, the British royals are working hand in hand with them, and British Israelism is a decoy to take our eyes off the real plot of relocating the Pope's chair to Jerusalem. And this is exactly what I've been teaching using dispensationalism. I was saying that the head of the NWO is going to be in Jerusalem. Rome might even be destroyed, and they're going to move to Jerusalem. This is part of the covenant that they're going to make with Israel, that they can move there, and then they will end up fighting against the Muslims so that they can secure the land and build the temple. There's going to be some kind of covenant deal that does this. I've been teaching this through dispensational prophecies. And then he's saying that that's exactly what they're going to do, but at the same time, he's trying to say that dispensationalism isn't true, which I find weird. Maybe he's just more into history than he is into the scriptures. I'm not even sure if this guy is Christian. But anyway, let's continue with this. It says, history shows that the Vatican Jesuits brought the Nazi regime into power in order to turn Europe into a nightmare for the Jews in hopes of relocating them to Palestine. To get the Christians on board with this program of national homeland for the Jews of Palestine, Jesuit dispensationalism was pumped into American churches through the Scofield Reference Bible, which has caused Christians to support Israel with bloodthirsty, unwavering support. I don't think you should do that, but don't fight against it. It says here, according to some researchers such as Chamish, the Vatican was given control of all the holy sites in East Jerusalem when Jesuit-trained Shimon Peres had the sites handed over to Vatican control through the Oslo Accords in 1993. The Vatican is apparently closing in on Jerusalem, trying to regain what was lost to the Muslims during the Crusades of the Middle Ages. Like I was saying, America is Rome's military, and we do all the crusades for them. The only problem is that the Muslims still control the Dome of the Rock, which supposedly sits on top of the remnant of Solomon's temple. The Vatican, while it would like to rebuild Solomon's temple, but needs to get the Dome of the Rock out of the way. Potential solutions in eyes of Vatican. Okay, let's see what he says here. This looks like where it wraps up. It says, foment World War III between the Muslims and the Jews in Israel and just take the Dome of the Rock from the Muslims. 2. Create peace and unity between Muslims and Jews and Christians through ecumenism, and just unite everybody on common religious grounds, thus avoiding war, and make Jerusalem an international city. Most likely the idea that British royals are going to make New Jerusalem in Britain or in the Middle East is just a Jesuit diversion. The British royals aren't pulling the strings of everything. The Jesuits in Rome are hiding behind them. The British government, like the US government, is also infested with Freemasonry and the Knights of Malta, among many other occult orders that feed into the Vatican. The real endgame is putting the Pope's chair in Jerusalem. After all, he's the vicar of Christ and God on earth, according to the papacy. And that's one thing that the Vatican does. It uses all kinds of different groups so that, let's say, you discover the Freemasonry and that they're corrupted. Oh man, what are they going to do? Well, they still got the Knights of Malta. They got this Illuminati, right? The Jesuit order. They got all these different groups that they're all using to do the same thing, right? So when you catch one of them, it doesn't matter. They still got other groups, right? That's why they're not using just one group, because then you would find them and you'd be able to exterminate them pretty easy. Because the Jesuits have been kicked out of all the countries of Europe at one point or another. So if they come in different groups and maybe even infiltrate groups that are created by the countries they infiltrate, they get trusted, right? Such as an FBI, CIA kind of thing. But anyway, the last paragraph here says, 1.2 billion Christians already bow down to him. The British royals certainly don't have that kind of devotion from the world's people. The dumbed-down Protestants will support the Pope in the name of unity if the right political conditions can be fabricated. Many Protestants already welcome the Pope with open arms. The whole world is probably going to end up bowing down to him if and when he moves into Jerusalem. But God's remnant will not. We've got our eyes on Jerusalem above. Praise God. So I'm not sure if this guy believes in the rapture, but this is still very good information here. Because he seems to think, just from how I'm interpreting what he's saying, is that we're going to go through this stuff. The futurism stuff about a rapture and the time of Jacob's trouble is not a thing. It doesn't seem like it's, this dispensational view he doesn't believe is true. So he believes we're going to go through this and that we're probably going to be the martyrs as Christians. I don't think he's right, but I hope you're not worried about it. I mean, if you're raptured or if you have to die for Christ, what's the big deal? Either way, you're going to heaven and you go into eternity. So either way, it doesn't matter. But anyway, there was a comment, the first one here, that I wanted to look at to wrap this up. It says here, remember the double agent betrayal of Cardinal Newman too? That guy was a Romanist from day one, a spy who worked the Anglican Church from the inside out, and then took a lot of lukewarm dupes along with him back to Rome when he had his conversion to Rome. This was part of that covert infiltration of England by Rome in the 1800s. And the reply is, yep, that's correct about Newman. These priests of Baal never sleep. They are absolutely committed to building up the kingdom of God on earth. But it's the kingdom of Satan, because like it says on the dollar bill, in God we trust. And people just think, oh yeah, the Christian God. Jesus. No, that's just what you assume. They worship the God of this world. Yeah, you want to read this for yourself, check it out. There's also some side articles on the side here that you might want to look at. I'll put this in the info box, so check it out. Thanks for watching. You take care. Alright, here's the 3 verses that I like to put in all the videos here. Isaiah 34:16, seek ye out the book of the Lord and read, so that Jesus doesn't tell you what he tells the Sadducees here in Matthew 22:29, ye do err, not knowing the scriptures. It's not that you err in error because you don't know the one true church that happens to be your denomination, or that you don't know the fundamental beliefs, or the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, or whatever creed, or that you don't know the magisterium or the clergy, or you don't know your favorite pastor or priest. That's why you're in error. No, you're in error because you don't know the scriptures. You need the scriptures to test to see whether or not those are correct, whether those are the right traditions, whether those are legitimate clergy, whether that church is actually following God, and whether those creeds line up. Those fundamental beliefs are found in the scriptures. Because knowing the scriptures is knowing God. Like we read here in John 17:3, Jesus says, and this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. This is a deep knowing. As Adam knew Eve and she conceived, you need to know God in like manner, so that you may be born again, that his word, his seed, abides in your heart, where you truly believe that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh, that he died in your place and gives you his life in exchange, so that your righteousness, your good and your bad, your life, past, present, and future, died 2,000 years ago. Your life is his. He can do what he wants with it. He puts it to death, and he gives you his life in exchange, his perfect, eternal life. That's the deep knowing you need to know of God. So, there you go. Do you know him? Do you want to know him? Get to know him. Thanks again for watching. Take care.
That fella couldn't join the church. He couldn't join the church. He couldn't get baptized. He couldn't get baptized. He woke up with God. He woke up with the devil. Are you saved? Amen. So that fella didn't take the sacraments. Didn't take the sacraments. Didn't say the rosary. Didn't say the rosary. Didn't tithe. Didn't tithe. He went to heaven. He went to hell. You saved? Didn't keep the law. He didn't keep the law. He broke the commandments. He broke the commandments. He didn't keep the golden rule. He didn't keep the golden rule. He woke up in glory. He woke up in the pit. Are you saved? You're saved. If you're not saved, you're over here or you're over here. You sure ain't in the middle. He said, Lord, remember me, thou comest thy kingdom. And Jesus turned to him and said, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be saved. It's like that. You have been saved? If you ever saved, you were saved like that.